Now that we're all together here in our Kerala home with my in-laws and living our kind of a version, at least temporarily, of the Indian joint family life and eagerly expecting our baby to arrive, I thought that what a better time to go way back in time and tell you guys the story about how I met my Indian in-laws. I had been together with Vinod for a little over 2 years, and we had even been in a live-in relationship for almost 1 year before I met his parents. Or actually, to be completely honest, even before he told about us to his parents. And I gotta say that throughout the whole initial years of our relationship, I was just like nagging on and on about this issue to Vinod, and it's just like very difficult for a Westerner to completely understand this cultural difference because I personally told my parents about Vinod before I even flew to India for our first date. If you are unfamiliar with this part of the story, I do recommend that you check how our love story went. But to continue with this, because I had told my parents so soon, it was impossible for me to understand why wouldn't Vinod at least like tell his parents about us and then like seriously introduce me to them also, because we were in a serious relationship. So I was nagging on and on about this, and he was just mostly avoiding the issue altogether. But to be completely fair, he did also try his best to explain the cultural difference to me. And then finally, I was able to understand this better, though I only understood it after I met the parents. The thing is that in India, you don't introduce a boyfriend or a girlfriend to the parents. You only introduce to-be spouses. So only if you're at the point where you are planning to get married is when you introduce someone to the Indian parents. Mind blown! Anyways, this kind of situation between two different cultures in a relationship obviously takes a lot of understanding. Don't have it. A lot of patience. Don't have it. But somehow we managed to get through that part, and eventually I did obviously meet his parents, and now let's get to that part. I had read quite a few online forums about foreigners being in relationship with Indian men and how they dealt with the cultural differences, and especially how they dealt with meeting the in-laws or getting their approval. And I have to say that these forums were a little bit US-centric, and I didn't get such like a positive image about the situations described in those forums. So I was feeling a little bit hesitant, like, oh my god, is this going to be some kind of terrible uphill battle that we have to go through? So I did feel quite a pressure to be able to charm Vinod's parents completely off their feet already on our first meeting, because I didn't want any kind of family fights. I didn't want it to be a battle for us to stay as a part of the family, and I just like desperately wanted also to be a part of the family and be included in their lives. So there was a lot of pressure, but to be completely honest, I had also from the very beginning of our relationship felt very confident about hitting it off with his parents and them actually liking me if they just get to know me. I had heard many good things about mommy and daddy from Vinod. I had often just like stayed quiet in the background when Vinod would be chatting over the phone with his parents, and he would always keep explaining the chats to me. So I had already a very good idea about what kind of people my in-laws were. I had this idea that daddy was going to be this like very goofy, caring man, and mommy just this like, oh my god, multi-talented, very practical tiger mommy who does everything for her family, and that we also shared so many interests. Because I remember in our first discussion about our parents with Vinod told me that his mom just like loves gardening and she grows her own sabzi and herbs, and I told him that oh my god, that is just like one of my life dreams also, to have my own small garden and to grow at least some of my own food. And he told me that oh my god, my mom is just like going to love you in the future. And that's what made me feel so confident about, as long as like they agree to meet with me and talk with me and get to know me as a person, we would definitely grow to cherish each other very much. Because I felt like with my values, with my interests, I would just like fit in the family like a nose on the face or something like that. And as long as we would just be able to forget the fact that we are such foreigners to each other, we would just like be one big happy family. Of course, Vinod's parents had their concerns and worries too, because marrying outside your community is still pretty uncommon here in India, and there's only this like very specific kind of talk when it comes to marrying a foreigner and what foreigners are like. So they were pretty much reliant on these stereotypes when it comes to a foreign person, because I am the first foreigner that they have ever met or even spoken to. So Vinod told his parents about me just a few days before I arrived in Jaipur, and I can still remember Vinod explaining those conversations to me. His parents were quite worried about several different topics. For example, it was very difficult for them to understand the fact that I'm an atheist. It's just like a concept that is very difficult for them to understand. Like, how can one not have a religion? But what does she believe in? Like, she must believe in something like this must be some kind of trick, like everyone believes in something. And of course, they had lots of concerns about what I would be willing to eat, because they thought that as a foreigner, I must be yearning for beef on every single meal that I have. And even if I don't, like, how will I be able to fit into a veg house? Because even though my father-in-law is non-veg, at home he only eats a veg diet, and my mother-in-law is completely pure veg. So oh my god, what will they ever be able to serve me? And I must be like completely unwilling to compromise on my diet. And obviously they didn't even realize that at the time I actually ate much less non-veg foods than my husband does, and I had even tried to be a vegan at that point. So for me, the assumption that I just absolutely need beef when I hadn't had beef in a few years, even before coming to India, was just like, oh, that is funny. Mommy and Daddy were concerned about how I would dress, what would the neighbors say, what would the extended family say, you know, log kia kahenge. And there were concerns about what would my attitude towards commitment to family and marriage be, because, you know, foreign women, they are a little bit loose and free-spirited. And I think one of their like most major concerns was that what if I don't like them, and what if I don't really like India and I will get bored, if I will just in the future whisk Vinod off with me back to Finland, or if they will ever be welcome into our Indian house. So there were lots of concerns for both of the sides, and it was just like a matter of getting to talk to each other and discuss those things over. For many weeks before I arrived in Jaipur for the first time, I tried my best to get Vinod to coach me for meeting his parents for the first time. But let's just say that Vinod's attitude was more like, who needs coaching? You just like, you know, wing it. And he, being himself a very like modern man who doesn't really follow all these like traditional Indian customs, he was pretty unwilling to pass those on to me. So initially I did all that I could on my own to learn as much as I could about India and his parents. And of course then I was studying a lot about the like Indian culture and current situations and history. And this is something that anyways comes naturally to me, so it wasn't like I was only doing it for the sake of meeting his parents and pleasing them, but I am very interested in understanding different kinds of people, especially if they're close to me, and also understanding and learning about the world around me in my immediate vicinity, especially. And I was like, with a very open mind, trying to absorb as much information as I could. So I knew most of the Indian customs that I would be expected to follow. Meeting the in-laws for the first time, I knew that I was expected to call them uncle and auntie, which personally was for a very long time quite difficult for me, because it's not a custom that we follow in Finland at all, where we don't really give titles to people. So I would just in Finland, if I had Finnish in-laws, I would just call them by their first name. I know, what a horror here in India. And of course, with time, I also did learn to understand Vinod's perspective, because I did realize that initially I was too focused on thinking about how his parents would want me to be, what is expected from an Indian bahu, and I was trying my best to be that, even though I wasn't able to be Indian actually, and I was just trying to find my way of really pleasing them. But eventually I realized that instead of that, I should just really focus on being myself, so that they could see that I'm a genuine, honest person who is very open-minded and respectful and understanding. And that is what would matter more than me following all these customs that are quite foreign to me. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that I disagree with in the online forums where I was reading stuff about meeting Indian in-laws, and the overall discussions that go with this, because I think they were just focusing too much on all the differences that we might have, when it would be most important to get to know each other as real human beings, and not to forget to show how much the real relationship means to us. So even though I had prepared differently, and I had an expectation that this is how I would make the meeting go, eventually it went quite differently. For my first visit to Vinod's parents' Jaipur house, I arrived straight from my solo trip to Nepal after 2 days of traveling by several buses and trains, and you can just imagine that after 2 days I was dirty, I was tired, just completely exhausted, and not in my most representable state. I was seriously so exhausted that I can still remember Vinod telling me that his mom was like, "Oh my god, she looks so old and tired, almost as old as me." And yep, that's how I look when I'm tired. Before I arrived to the house, I had thought about all these little different things that I should maybe do. Of course, I knew that Indian parents and older people, they really value if you touch their feet upon meeting. But Vinod had initially said that, oh, I shouldn't do that because he's never touched anyone's feet. But I had thought that, oh, but I just if this is one thing that can make them really like me, I am gonna do it. But then eventually at the door, I just froze and did not do that, because it's just not something that comes naturally to me at all. So instead of touching mommy and daddy's feet, I just did a very proper namaste, bowed my head deep, and greeted them with more natural joy for being there finally. As I was so tired after all the traveling, I must say that the first night is a bit of a haze in my head, but I remember that it was quite awkward to begin with. I had a really late arrival. I think it was after 10 p.m. that I got to the house, and I just got a nice dinner first, and then we were huddled in the living room to talk for a little while before I just had to go to bed. And it was kind of a semi-interrogation, which I did also encourage because I wanted them to be able to ask me absolutely anything that they might worry about, so that I could like clear their minds from those worries. So we talked a lot about those issues, and I especially remember Sangeeta being very kind and welcoming to me from the very first moment that I arrived there. And yeah, then we all just went to bed, and that is kind of my memory from the first evening. But then the next day, everything already started feeling much more natural and going so much better. And that is also when I took my like trick up from my sleeve, my ace card. And even though I didn't I want to impress them in an Indian way, which doesn't come naturally to me, which is the like touching feet thing, I still wanted there to be something special to show them how much I care about having a really good relationship with them. So I had bought them gifts from my trip to Nepal, some organic chai, which I had like many times asked Vinod on the phone, like, okay, so what tea does your mommy like? Like, I'll get the best tea there is. And then I also had a hand-painted postcard of the mountains, which I had written a really nice message on my train journey to Jaipur. And in the message, I was just like really trying my best to convey my deepest feelings about Vinod and the family in just a few words to my in-laws, because this is how I show that I care. That's what comes most naturally to me. And I wanted to do it in Hindi to show that I care about India and their customs and traditions. And I was translating it myself, so it might be really bad. Let me just like quickly read you what I wrote, so you like actually get to see how to impress Indian in-laws. Okay, so I'm very sorry if it's like absolutely terrible Indian Hindi grammar, and if it makes you feel uncomfortable with all its emotions. Dear uncle and auntie, आपसे मिलकर बहुत खुशी हुई. मुझे पता है कि हम हैं चुनौतियों का होगा, परंतु आपने बेटा को प्यार करती हूँ और मैं अपने परिवार का एक हिस्सा होने के लिए तत्पर हैं और मेरे लिए परिवार हमेशा के लिए है. And I must say that it really paid off to be myself, genuine, honest, and show how I really felt about the situation, because I feel like that's the best any one of us can do, is to just be ourselves and show that we care. Because after receiving the gifts and reading the card, something pretty spectacular happened. So mommy came to hug me and whispered in my ear, "Thank you." And to me, it was just like one of the moments that I cherish the most in like our family's story, because I think that in that moment, mommy saw me for the person that I truly am. And for that day and the next day before we left, we had such a wonderful time. I instantly became a real part of the family. And before we left, mommy also gifted me a salwar kameez and a few dupattas. On our next visit to Jaipur, when we spent 3 weeks there for Sangeeta's wedding, I was already such a vital part of the family that I was even included in all the wedding rituals that we were performing for Sangeeta, where you usually only have like married couples. So I was treated as Vinod's wife, even though at that point we officially were not married. In all the time after that, I even lived alone with Vinod's parents in Jaipur before we got married. I stayed with them for 3 months and had a very wonderful time. They are just like absolutely my second set of parents, and they take care of me in even my like sicknesses, and especially now during my pregnancy. And I have a lot of respect and understanding for mommy and daddy, and they absolutely return it to me too. I've been there next to mommy multiple times when there might have been people to question my in-laws, like, why did mommy let Vinod marry me? And mommy just like replies to anyone that I am the best bahu that they could ever wish for. And it's just like we have crossed the barrier where there is no such thing as foreign or anything in our family, but we are like a big, happy, tight-knit family. Sometimes I actually even feel like they might love me a little bit more than they love Vinod. But honestly, I just like could not ask for better in-laws than mommy and daddy are, and I'm just so happy that currently we are all staying together here in Kerala at our home, and I have them here with me to share these last few months expecting for our first baby, and then of course to share the arrival of our baby into this world. And it's just like my joy and happiness multiplies when I have people I love to share it with. I really hope that you enjoyed this little story hour here, and especially if there are any other international couples with the other partner being Indian out there, I hope that this was helpful to you, because I don't think that it should be such a big scare and monster on your shoulder to meet the in-laws for the first time. So maybe this will be help for you too in the future. Thank you so much for watching this, and I hope to show our joint family life a little bit more to you soon again. Stay tuned. I'll see you soon. Mwah.